Howdy folks, this is CowTipper Vern again. Leaving an extreme, high-control religious group involves deconstructing how you view many topics. It involves reassessing them, redefining them in a healthier way, and then reclaiming them. This time I'm going to talk about thoughts. Last time I talked about emotions. I didn't really explain why I started the series there. I started it there because when I was first leaving meetings and deconstructing my beliefs and my feelings about the 2x2 system and 2x2 culture, I realized that 2x2 culture permeated me to the point that my emotional reaction to things started with a 2x2 reaction, because 2x2s control our emotions, and my emotions have been controlled my entire life. So to get anywhere, I had to get past my first reaction, which was an emotional reaction. The next layer after that is my thoughts, because once I allowed myself to just be honest about how I was feeling, I could then progress on to thinking about it. I could start analyzing my own understanding of things and my thoughts around it. And that's important because that's when I realized that 2x2 culture had a grip on my thoughts as well, even how I thought. This podcast is going to be about that. It's going to be about how 2x2 culture controls your thoughts. It controls how you think. It rewords things so you think about them differently. It stops your thoughts. It stops you from thinking. And it teaches you explicitly that your thinking is bad. That when you think about things, your own thoughts and reasoning are wrong by definition. And it's part of why you yourself are bad. You yourself are evil and sinful, whether you've done anything wrong or not. Just by existing, just by having thoughts and having emotions, you've done a bad thing. Or if you've not done a bad thing, you're just existing badly. You exist wrong, and you need to feel bad about that first and foremost. And you need to fix that by going to meetings and listening to workers preach the gospel. If you grow up going to meetings, if you're born and raised in it, you're raised thinking that you're a terrible person and everything you like and want to do is sinful and evil. And the world's also bad, so pretty much everything's bad, but professing is good. If you go to meetings, everything's fine. If you're a convert, usually the message probably starts with the world is bad. Then you can come to meeting and find out that, wow, yourself is bad too, but hey, professing's good. Those three things, world bad, self bad, professing good, those three little items can be shifted around depending on who you are. But it's important that you get all three of them. You need to judge yourself really badly. You also need to judge the world. And then you don't judge the professing at all. You don't judge the workers. They're perfect and good. And that's it. That's your model for life. That's your picture of what the world looks like. 2x2 culture changes how you look at everything. The first thing 2x2 culture does is it teaches you that professing is always right. It teaches you that meetings are good and professing is good and right, and the only good and right way. And it manipulates all the language that you use to reinforce that particular thing. All of the language, everything I talk about today, is used to direct you toward the exclusivity of the 2x2s. I've actually heard some of them say recently that they're not exclusive, and I just can't even take that seriously. I don't know why they would even say that at this point. Every phrase they say directs you to go to meetings and listen to workers. That's it. Not toward God, not toward belief, not toward understanding of a higher power or higher concepts. It's just going to meetings. That's it. And all of the language makes you think that that is the thing to do. And if you think anything separate from that, it condemns it immediately. They do that by how they present the Bible. They read it in a very truncated manner. They read the Bible, especially the workers, read the Bible in very short little clips. They'll read a verse here and a verse there and tie them together with some professing context. A worker once told me it was like skipping a rock across a pond. You just read a verse here and then a verse way over here and then a verse way over here, and then you have your testimony for the meeting. It's very rare that you hear someone actually read the Bible all the way through. And I'll talk more about reading the Bible probably in my next episode. But for now, I just wanted to point out that it affects how you think about the Bible itself, the way they talk about it. It makes you not read into the Bible too much. It's a form of thought stopping. There's a way of reading the Bible so that you don't actually read it or understand it or get into it. And then for your actual doctrine, they have a hymn book and you go read that. There's a lot of repetition. A lot of the thought stopping happens through repetition. It's really funny that workers often preach against vain repetition, quote unquote, because I think that's a phrase in the Bible, if I remember right. But they repeat stuff all the time. every meeting is the same repetition. The prayers are repeated, the graces you sing over meetings, the graces you sing before meals sometimes, if that's something you do, are repeated all the time. I was an adult before I realized that some of those graces aren't even prayers, by the way. It's like you pray and you bow your head, but you're not actually praying to God. You're referring to God in third person, but you're not even talking to him. I didn't even realize that until I was much older. I was so locked into professing culture that I just did it. I didn't think about it at all, which is the point of this podcast. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, go look at the lyrics for The Grace All Things Living. I'm going to talk more about thought-stopping cliches later at the end of the episode. I have a list of them, and they're kind of fun to talk about. But the primary point of this podcast is to demonstrate the thought-stopping nature of 2x2 worship, 2x2 belief system, 2x2 culture. You stop thinking about your belief. You don't listen to yourself when you think. You don't listen to others when they think. You demean the thoughts and words and actions of other people. You look down on your own thoughts. You don't trust yourself. You don't trust your thoughts. When something seems wrong, you ignore it because someone else said it's right. When something seems good to you but other people haven't blessed it, you decide that it's wrong, and you talk down about yourself constantly. The goal of the 2x2 teachings is to completely diminish the individual to nothing, and they nearly say so. Their idea is to replace that with a worship of God, but as I'll talk about later, the worship of God is really honoring the workers in meetings. The worst thing 2x2 culture does, or the worst thing the teachings do, the worst result of the teachings anyway, in my opinion, is to completely separate the person from themselves. I've already talked about how even your emotions get messed up. Even your emotions are detached from you, and you have to have the correct emotions, or you have to frame your emotions in a certain way to make them acceptable to professing people and to workers especially. The worst thing that professing culture does, in my opinion, is teaches you how to talk yourself down. It creates bad self-talk. It creates very negative self-talk, and it creates a terrible image of yourself. And it sets you up from a very early age to never question, because why would you question if you're already a bad person? If you're a sinful and evil person, the idea that you would question something that you're also being told is good is sinful in and of itself. 2x2 culture is constant belittling, constant crushing of the self, of the spirit. A really common thing that I see among people leaving meetings is having to deal with self-esteem issues because they don't even know how to talk to themselves kindly, because their thoughts are so finely tuned to put themselves down. Not to say that humility is bad. Humility could be virtuous, but we don't talk that way. We don't think that way. We call it humility sometimes, but it's really just really, really poor self-esteem. Most of our testimonies are a result of this. When you go to a convention or even a regular Bible study or Sunday morning meeting, you find that most of the testimonies are just people talking badly about themselves and being thankful that even they could be saved. Even they can have something as wonderful as these meetings. They feel so much better in meetings because, the world's out there trying to ruin us, and the world, the flesh, and the devil are after us, and especially this flesh. I'm a sinful person. And it's just reinforced over and over and over. Changing how you feel about yourself and the thoughts that you have and detaching you from your own thoughts is just awful. I really hate it. I really hate that that's a thing that it does. Constantly making you feel guilty, feeling terrible about yourself, and feeling unsaved especially, is really abusive. It's constantly reinforced in gospel meetings with little phrases like, we're full of sin, aren't we? We're an evil man. We're full of sin, aren't we? The flesh is so terrible. The flesh is desperately wicked. Every thought in our heart is evil continually. A lot of this stuff is from the Bible. And again, I try to avoid getting into theology too much on this. I will at some point, but not right now. I think there's a lot of ways that we negotiate with the Bible when we read it. And we could choose to not think that we're terrible all the time. We could choose to think that, our Creator loves us and doesn't want to just plunge us into hell if we make a little mistake or have a thought in our heads that we can't control. But we don't. We don't do that. We chastise ourselves constantly for every thought that goes through our head. It becomes It leads to really bad image of self, and in some people it manifests in scrupulosity. Some people fight depression. Some people fight all kinds of self-image issues. It's a constant assault on your self-esteem. And it's very confusing too, because on some level, you probably know that you're not a bad person, but you keep hearing that you are. So you have to keep pounding yourself down because your thoughts are bad. Every thought that you have, if it's not a workerly thought, if it doesn't sound professing enough, then it's not good. It's evil and could send you to hell. But then, on top of all that, when we're feeling bad about ourselves, bad about our thoughts, bad about the emotions we have, we also hear that we have to forgive our brothers for their trespasses. We also hear that God's ways are higher than our ways. God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And by that, of course, they mean the workers' thoughts. So we hear that we will never measure up. We'll never do it. And the thought of it is just awful and evil. We'll never measure up. And even our thoughts condemn us. And then we have to forgive other people who've offended us. This is a very subtle sleight of hand with an obvious outcome. And that is, it gives a lot of power to people who want to abuse other people within the church. Because their victims already think they themselves are bad. They already think that the bad things that happen to them are because of their own thoughts. Thoughts that they can't control, by the way. We're taught from the time we're born that the thoughts that we cannot control in our own heads are manifestations of how bad and sinful we are. Then someone comes along and does something to us and we feel upset about it. Well, we've already heard that we've already heard that appropriate emotions are smashed down. We've already heard that appropriate emotions are suppressed, repressed. So of course we're going to start changing our thoughts after that too. And we're going to forgive people who do terrible, terrible things while we can't forgive ourselves for thoughts that we can't control. It's diabolical. Our relationship to ourselves and our thoughts about ourselves is most notable in relation to other people within the meetings, like workers and friends. Obviously, the friends believe that God is perfect, but they also believe that workers speak for God. They might even tell you they don't. They might even just tell you, well, they're just bringing a message from God, but they believe strongly that they're the only good messengers for God. So workers are bringing a message in the same way that the previous workers did, in the same way that the previous workers to them did, in an unbroken lineage back to Jesus. That's the living witness doctrine you hear people talk about sometimes. It means that you have to be saved by listening to them. That's the only way to be saved. Well, we know that believers believe that God is perfect and all-knowing and controls everything. That's what 2x2s believe. But they also believe that workers speak for God. And so the workers have a sort of perfection projected onto them that they never have to earn. We just know from the very beginning that they speak for God and the words they say are perfect and what they do is blessed and led by God. The reason this messes with how we think about ourselves is if you're listening objectively to what a worker says, or if you even listen to what two workers say, you know that it's not perfect and they don't agree with each other. And that's okay. You could say that about any ministry anywhere, probably. But most ministries would probably be interested in talking about it, not the 2x2 workers. The 2x2 workers also believe themselves that what they're saying is perfect. And so you have to do what they say, even if you among yourselves agree that, well, workers are just people, just like us. They're not treated that way. They're treated as perfect. But you can tell by listening to them that they're not. In fact, they might not even say they are themselves, but you still have to treat them that way. It's very confusing. And the reason I brought it up on this podcast, there's an obvious gap between ourselves and perfection. But when that gap is narrowed, because you're actually not looking at God, you're looking at people, the only way to raise that gap to what it should be, the only way to spread that gap back out to what you know that it is by diminishing yourself and talking down to yourself and dwelling on your sin and dwelling on how bad you are. And the workers are more than happy to help you do that. Many, many sermons talk a lot about how God's ways are higher than our ways. They mean that, but then they also mean that what they're saying is more important than what we're thinking. Workers have been known to get into the minutia of people's lives or the minutia of people's worship because they're speaking on behalf of God and they're trying to keep order among us sinful people. Workers freely express opinions on everything from how you're raising your kid, which they've never done, to your relationship with your spouse, which they've never had, to how you should act in school, to how you dress, to how you talk, even into minutiae such as one time I was in a meeting that wanted to change the meeting the meeting start time a half an hour so that somebody else could get there, and the workers wouldn't allow it. They just didn't want to. In fact, that decision went all the way up to the overseer, and the overseer, who's over a 3-state area, came down and told us that we couldn't change the meeting time a half an hour. So what are you supposed to do with that? What you're supposed to do is learn that no matter what you think, it's not good. It doesn't matter the quality of what you think. It really doesn't matter what it is that you're thinking at all. What matters is that you're thinking it. Your thoughts are not good. God's ways are higher than yours. So says the worker who speaks for God. There's a constant assault on our thinking using terms like man's wisdom. Man's wisdom leads to a maze. I was talking to somebody recently who asked where that was in the Bible because they grew up thinking that was in the Bible. It's not. It's in a hymn. And that's kind of funny because once again, the doctrine comes from the hymn book, not the Bible. But I mean, sure, some of it comes from the Bible, but you know what I mean. A lot of it comes from a hymn book that's been manipulated over time and changed quite a bit. In this unchanged way that goes back to Jesus on the shores of Galilee. The effect of having people constantly disregard adults and their opinions and thoughts and reasoning is very infantilizing. It's an infantilization of humans. Adults get into adulthood not knowing how to make decisions. This is very, very common. I talk to people all the time who have gotten well into their 30s and 40s, maybe older, before realizing they didn't make decisions for themselves. In fact, I can identify with that a lot myself, and I've said so to some of my friends and to my therapist. Because when you're professing, you pray about it, and then you ask a worker. Many, many, many times in my life, I've had a question or a thought or an idea and been told explicitly, not some sort of euphemism that I'm supposed to understand intuitively, explicitly, have you talked to the workers about it? We should talk to the workers about it. The gap that has to be maintained to think that the workers are that much above us is gigantic. To maintain the gap that's required to believe that the workers are that far above us, we have to minimize ourselves a lot. We have to talk down to ourselves. We have to think we are terrible and miserable creatures born in sin, living in sin. And that type of idea gets carried out in testimonies all the time too. If you listen to testimonies, especially at some place like a convention, you'll just hear people say over and over how much sin they have. Oh, I barely made it here to this meeting today. I'm so full of sin. No one ever grapples with the idea that God made them that way. That's off the table. We don't talk like that in meetings because we don't think about it. We don't think. We just know what's acceptable to say, and we say it and we say it and we say it, and we hope for God's mercy and the workers' approval. The other effect this thinking has on you and the people around you if you're professing is that once you've completely internalized the idea that your thoughts are bad, and therefore any reasoning is bad and any thinking is bad, any decisions made based on your own human reasoning, your faulty man's wisdom, is bad. If you see somebody else making a decision that you wouldn't make based on your understanding of the Bible, you assume that they're evil. You assume that they're sinful and awful and bad people. I have kicked many friends to the curb in my life. Maybe they didn't know it, but I've done it. Because I saw them making decisions that I wouldn't make, and I was living the humblest life I possibly could at that moment. Haven't always, but at that moment I was. And so I assumed the sinful worst about them and didn't want to associate with them. That's a terrible thing to do to people. Recently, since leaving, I've been able to reconnect with some friends from when I was much younger, and we've all had similar experiences. And I've had apologies to make, and I've received some as well, and it's been really nice. We're using our man's wisdom now, and we're having fellowship. So, our thoughts around the ministry and the way, quote unquote, are manipulated in real time, and our thoughts about ourselves are manipulated in real time. The other thoughts that are manipulated are our thoughts about the outer world. Of course the outer world is evil. Of course it is. The world lies a lot, just like the devil. The devil lies a lot. Remember, we have 3 parts of the world, the flesh, and the devil. You can make some arguments theologically about all of those things, but we're lumping the most evil thing in the world, the devil. We're lumping the evil world itself in with ourselves and our thoughts. Some of our thoughts are manipulated in real time to put separation between us and the world by way of manipulating the phrasing, manipulating the words around them. Things like, when they say serving God, they don't mean serving God. When workers talk about serving God, they always mean go to meetings. That's all they mean. Anybody who's come to them and says, hey, I already serve God, that is not good enough. The workers won't accept that. There are many, many, many stories of people who've come to meetings and said, I've been baptized, but I really like this church. I like the meetings. I was already baptized in another church, but I really love the meetings. Not good enough. The workers won't accept that because everything except the inside is the world. So there's this constant push and pull in your minds, especially if you're raised in it, to isolate the idea of God from the world, including the religious world. And what that does is it trains you to think that anything professing is godly and anything not professing isn't. There's a reason a lot of people, when they leave meetings, have to completely change how they view God. I've talked to a lot of people who've even go so far as to changing the pronouns of God just because it doesn't work for them. To hear he, him, father, and all that is very difficult because of this idea that the God they were raised with wanted them so separate from the world and condemned even the thoughts in their hearts, even the thoughts in their heads. It's very difficult to deal with that, and to get away from that idea, sometimes they have to change their entire conception of God. And, without getting into theology, I say more power to them. There's also the manipulation of thoughts around how you deal with other people in the world or in meetings. When somebody leaves meetings, we say they lost out. Well, lost out on what? Well, lost out on salvation, lost out on knowing, loving God, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's just they lost out. They're gone now. They lost out on the prize they were getting for being in meetings. That's a very sneaky way of associating, again, meetings with right and everything else with wrong. And also, godly love is another one. I'm going to talk about this one a lot because it's really frustrating to me. Changing how you view love and changing how you view all kinds of things based on the qualifiers you put in front of it is really diabolical to me. And it's extra diabolical when that qualifier is God. When somebody says godly love as a way of diminishing how they're treating somebody badly, that's really frustrating. It shows that when they say love, they don't actually mean that. It shows that when they say love, they know that you're going to hear it as not love, so they put godly in front of it so that you'll know that it's love. They have to tell you. They have to caption it. This is godly love. So when they deal with somebody who's not professing enough or someone in the horrible world that they come across, but they want to treat them badly, they feel very uncomfortable with that person, they can do it, and then they can call it godly love. Godly love would make that person come to meetings. Godly love would tell that person to stop not professing. Godly love would tell that person to profess and get into meetings and get baptized right. You can treat somebody really, really badly and call it love if you put a qualifier in front of it. And that's a very clever way of manipulating the thoughts around it. Because you hear godly and immediately, as you've been trained, you immediately think it's good. The best thing about leaving for me, the best thing of all, has been that I don't have to do that ever again. I never, ever have to equivocate. Equivocating by changing words, saying, well, we think this, but actually this. Saying, well, we said this, but actually what that means is this, and then changing the meaning completely so that it makes sense or that it can be accepted by the audience. Well, we love, but we don't approve. We love the sinner, but hate the sin. That kind of equivocation, I never have to do that again. It's the best part of leaving because I can just be honest in how I speak. And I don't have to manipulate my thoughts through a strainer of 2x2 belief systems. I don't have to form and mold my thoughts so that I talk differently. And I can learn and I can grow. Learning and growing, I'll talk more about this in the next podcast, but learning and growing is looked down upon very much so by professing people and by the workers. Partially because it involves questioning on some level. If you question, you learn. And if you learn, you kind of have to leave. But to question, it means you've thought for yourself a little bit and you have questions. Again, with the manipulation of words and meanings, we're raised to think that the act of asking a question is bad and evil. We're taught that from a very early age. We even have hymns that tell us not to question, to have faith that doesn't question, stuff like that. I'll talk more about that in Thought Stopping Cliches. We're taught very early that any sort of questioning we do is of the devil and evil and sinful and of self. There's self again, our thoughts. Our thoughts make us evil and make us want to learn things. Well, if we don't question, we can't learn. And if we can't learn, we can't leave. So it works out pretty well. And that's why a lot of people, when they first question, they go to learn something. And when they learn something, they leave because they can't stay anymore. It doesn't work. And that's unfortunate for the people on the inside. And that's not to say that anybody on the inside hasn't questioned and hasn't learned anything. It's just to say that it's not very easy to do. We're warned all the time not to learn too much. We're warned all the time not to even think on things that we shouldn't think on. It's usually couched in verbiage like, be careful what you feed on, be careful what you rest your heart on, stuff like that. All of this is manipulating your thoughts to accept exclusivity. The idea that you can't even think on things, you should not even think on things of the world, or you shouldn't allow fleshly thoughts, you shouldn't allow things of the flesh. These are all just thoughts in your head, and you're turned against them from a very early age. I actually think this is abusive. I think it's diabolical, and I think it's not right to do to people without expressly explaining what you're doing. I understand the idea of needing to have mature thoughts and changing how you think about things and trying to have a better outlook. Maybe you want to have a stoic outlook. Maybe you want to be more optimistic. There's things you can do to help yourself be in a good mindset. That's fine, but it's done explicitly. It's done to explain, I would like to think more positive thoughts or something like that. There's many ethical exercises you can do, but not explaining what you're doing and turning people against their own thoughts is diabolical. Not explaining what you're doing and turning people against their own thoughts, turning people against themselves from an early age, so that young kids stand up in convention and give tearful, quivering testimonies about how their thoughts are bad and they're evil, is really abusive. I don't think it's okay. And I'm glad I don't have to do that with my kids. And I'm so glad that I don't have to equivocate and pretend that that's good ever again. Now, I've mentioned the phrase thought-stopping cliches a couple times, and it's something I want to talk about a little bit more. I'm going to give a trigger warning for the rest of this episode. For those of you who maybe don't do well listening to meetings anymore, if you listen into meetings, it's very triggering for you. If workers speak, worker phrasing, all of that stuff, if the way people communicate in meetings is triggering to you, the rest of this podcast might bother you a little bit. But I'm going to talk about the thought-stopping cliches, all these cliches and phrases and euphemisms that are very, very common in 2x2 vernacular that are designed to stop you from thinking, that are designed to be placeholders where you might have a question or even just a normal human thought or a concern even. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these, but if phrases like, we're in the world, but we're not of the world, bother you, this might be a good time to just stop this episode. So I'm going to talk about those phrases now. I'm fascinated by them. There's so many of them. If you'd have asked me to come up with a couple, I probably could have thought of some, but when I sit down and write some down, it's amazing how many I can come up with. You can create whole conversations that don't say anything, but make you feel really professing. As I mentioned before, I'm an admin of an X2x2 support group online. And recently I was trying to put together a list of thought-stopping cliches or euphemisms or sentences we say to stop ourselves from thinking as 2x2s. Things that we can say that fill in the gap between the emotions and actually getting any information. They're things that we hear in meetings, and anytime somebody wants to learn something, wants to know something, or just has a question, these phrases are volleyed at us so that we don't have to think anymore. We can just follow. I actually decided to crowdsource this list. I went to my support group online and asked everyone to try to think of thought-stopping cliches that they'd heard. The list was really long. I went through and made a list from them that kind of goes along with this podcast episode. And I'm going to read through them really quickly. I could probably do a whole podcast just on this list, but I'm going to try to run through this list really quickly and give little comments as I go, because it fits so well with this podcast, in the sense that this is a list of phrases that keep you from thinking. Anytime you have a question, anytime you have a worry, anytime you even have an original thought, you can just look at this list and not think anymore and just follow and not question. And this list will tangent into the next episode that'll come out soon. I split the list up into several topics. There's the way, there's your place in the way, there's your interaction with the world, and then there's commentary on the world. First off, the way. Something we have often heard the last few years, especially since the beginning of the scandal that's enveloping the group right now, is the way is perfect, but the people aren't. That's a really handy way of saying that person did a bad thing, and even though they did what they did and lived the way they did entirely because they were in this group, The group can't be held responsible for the thing that person did. Oh, you're saying 900 people may have done bad things? Well, the way is perfect, but 900 people aren't. Do with that what you will. The way is narrow. People often talk about the way is narrow. That's based on a verse in the Bible. But they like to talk about the way being narrow when they see somebody acting like they don't approve of, so they can say they're not in the way anymore. That's a pretty handy way of just discarding somebody's individuality. The way goes back to the shores of Galilee. I've talked about that before. It's really funny and it makes me laugh because it doesn't mean anything. But they like to say it because it adds credibility somehow. God works in mysterious ways. Anytime we don't know what's going on, we just credit the mysteriousness to God and not to our own incompetence or our own inability to understand what we're doing. If there's ever a question and we can't answer it, we know that the way is perfect. We already know that. The way is perfect, but the people aren't. So we'll just give God the credit for all the shortcomings. It's a weird thing to do, but they can squirt in their head somehow. There's a lot of cliches about workers, and I'm not going to go into a ton of them because I don't like to make this about people. I like to make it about systems. But workers are often referred to as laborers in the harvest field. There's a lot of euphemisms and cliches around workers being in the harvest field. We say that because we never think about what they're actually doing. They're not harvesting anything. They're definitely not harvesting souls. They're not even reaching out with the gospel. Recently, phone numbers to call into meetings have been getting taken down because they were afraid people were going to call in and actually listen and comment on it sometimes. Give some reflection. The workers don't actually want that. Very rarely do you see a worker actually bring a new soul, a new person, to a meeting, to a gospel meeting. There are very, very few converts. But we talk about them as laborers in the harvest field. It's a clever little sleight of hand to make it look like the workers do something besides have long dinners and talk about genealogy. Then there's the category of phrases about you and your place in the kingdom and things that you should do to be more professing. You should be kingdom-minded and you should fill your place. Fill your little place, even. There's a lot of little going on. A lot of phrases have little thrown in. I'm not really sure why, but the humility, kind of the faux humility of it all, makes you feel special. It makes you feel like, I don't know, being kingdom-minded just means don't contradict the workers and make sure everything you do aims back at meeting. So if you're thinking about something and it doesn't glorify meetings with the workers, then it's not kingdom-minded. The kingdom, of course, should be the kingdom of God, but it always just means meetings. Another phrase is having a close walk with Jesus or having a close walk with God and staying in the center of the fold. Those are some phrases. Same thing. It just means don't stray too far. Stay in meeting. Go to meeting. That's the only test for these things, by the way. No one ever compares what you're doing to the Bible or the teachings of Jesus. They compare it to when were you last in meeting. There's a lot of little corrections they give through thought-stopping phrases like having a childlike spirit or the spirit of a lamb. Have an unwavering faith that questions not. You know, if you had faith, you wouldn't question. Anytime anybody ever has a question or a thought about anything, anytime someone raises their hand and says, wait, what are we doing here? The fact that they're doing that, the fact that they're thinking this through means they don't have faith, according to workers and according to teachings and according to 2x2 culture. It means their spirit isn't right. That's another way of tossing somebody to the curb, is saying they don't have a right spirit. It's not childlike. It's not like Jesus. Their spirit is bad. A lot of these thought-stopping cliches are just ways of discouraging people from having opinions, thinking for themselves, and interceding for each other when each other are in trouble. We're told constantly to die to self. That's a tough one. Dying to self could mean anything. I ingested this one whole when I was a kid. I knew that what that actually meant for me was that any opinion I had or any thought that I had to be subjugated to God. But God, in this case, was represented by professing family and the workers in meetings. You have to put everything else before yourself. And I think a lot of people are in therapy right now because they're realizing they don't know themselves at all. This thought-stopping cliche stopped actual thought. Because anything that popped into your head, if it didn't come from the workers, then it couldn't be good. It had to be bad by definition. That's an extremely damaging thing to teach people. So die to self. We hear about dying to self all the time. Anytime you're in a meeting, you probably hear it 3 or 4 times each convention. We need to die to ourselves. Meaning if we have an idea, stop having that idea and go do something else. Dying to self is an interesting one because it ties the idea of self, meaning things you like, to death, meaning dying. It's just the general idea that it's better off to die than to enjoy anything. There's an acronym for joy that comes up a lot. JOY. Jesus first, others second, yourself last. It's the same as the die to self thing. Put everybody else ahead of you. Put the workers' ideas over yours. Put your professing elders' ideas over yours. Put everyone else's feelings and thoughts above your own as a show of humility and a show of reverence for God. Again, conflating the eternal creator with the ideas of workers. If you want to get your therapist to punch a hole in a wall, just tell him the joy thing. Jesus first, others second, yourself last. That phrase right there is employing a lot of therapists. When we're not acting right, people say you're professing but not possessing, meaning you're coming to meeting but you're still not acting quite right. If you're a woman, you probably have bangs or wore pants one time. If you're a guy, maybe you watch sports on TV or something. You're professing, meaning you're showing up, you're doing the right thing, but you're not possessing. That's bad. If you ever have doubts, just don't have them. Just stop having them. Doubt your doubts. It's a really common one. I've heard that in other religious communities as well. It's really funny. Don't doubt your faith, doubt your doubts. Don't doubt the part of you that doesn't have any evidence. Doubt the part that does, is what that means. Don't put a question mark where God puts a period. I don't even know what that means. I've seen it equated to untimely death a few times. Really awful thing to say. God putting a period on something, I guess, means you just can't do it anymore, or someone's died. I'm not sure. Putting a question mark where God has put a period sounds like you just want to do your own thing again. Again, all of these phrases basically mean the same thing. It means come to meeting, don't do anything you want. Don't have a questioning spirit. That's another one, again with the spirit thing. No one can really define what spirit is, but usually it's your attitude, usually it's how you act, usually it's how you interact with people. It's not a great way to measure how somebody's acting because, as we've seen over the last few years, lots of great people with great spirits have done terrible, terrible things. So I would say that needs to be defined a little better. You don't want to have a wrong spirit, that's for sure. A fun one when you hear somebody actually struggling, maybe realizing they have their own will and they have questions and they can't do anything with it. The worker will say, struggling is a sign of life. So everything's terrible and it sucks, but that's actually good. What a weird thing to say. Tell that one to your therapist. Struggling is a sign of life. The visual there is unsettling at best. Nothing matters but salvation. Or we'll understand in eternity. Those are two things you hear when the argument is over. You've expressed doubts, you've expressed concerns. Maybe you have an issue that needs to be dealt with, you feel like. And the professing people just don't want to hear it. They just discard it completely because it's an earthly thing. It's a worldly thing. It's a thing on earth. Whether it's worldly or not, doesn't really matter. Maybe it has to do with meetings. Maybe it even has to do with workers that you have concerns about. Well, nothing matters but salvation. Just let it go. We'll worry about it in eternity. The perfect response to justify not doing anything and feeling really good about it. Just don't think about it now. Think about a hymn, because that's what the nothing matters but salvation is, actually. As I mentioned before, a lot of professing doctrine actually is just their hymns. They don't have any published writings, but they do have a hymn book that's cobbled together from workers writing things and religious hymns sometimes retooled a little bit. Sometimes worker hymns retooled a little bit because the teachings have changed over the years. Nothing matters but salvation is a hymn, and it's pretty handy. If you go onto any message boards with professing people, you'll see professing people using hymns as thought-stopping mechanisms. As soon as they start to have any questions or thoughts or anything, even just basic discussion, not even doubts, somebody will whip out a hymn or a line from a hymn and recite it as if it's doctrine from Jesus. It's interesting. As you interact with the world, there's a whole new set of thought-stopping cliches and phrases. Everyone's favorite is, be in the world but not of the world. I've heard people who were raised 2 by 2 joke that it would be better to have just been raised in a commune because at least, even though none of it made any sense, at least we'd have each other in there, you know? It's a joke, but it's kind of funny because it's a relatable and understandable joke because we were raised to be very, very, very different, but in the world. You know, be raised among the world, but don't have any friends. Don't have a TV, don't dress like anybody. Be very different, but be among them anyway. That was a real struggle for me when I was younger. Being in the world, but not of the world is a real difficult thing to live out, especially when you're young. You're othering yourself as you go through life. They say, don't hide your candle under a bushel. That's a Bible verse. Be a light in the world. It just means go out in the world, but don't be like them. Be like yourself. Be weird. And if you're struggling, well, that's a sign of life, like we just heard. If it's difficult for you, it's difficult for a reason, because you're actually the good one. No matter what happens, you don't have to think about this at all. You are the saved one. You are God's chosen person. You know truth, capital T. If you have concerns, just pray about it. Be led by the Spirit. God will give you peace. Don't judge. God is the judge. All that kind of stuff. We say don't judge, but then we judge everybody all the time. 2x2s love to judge. They say they don't judge so that it gives them license to just judge nonstop. 2x2s love to be in the world, but not of the world, and then say don't judge, which is completely opposite sentiments. There's constant judgment of everyone around you all the time. You have to, or you'll realize you're dressed weird. You have to, or you'll realize you're the weird one. You are the only Bible that some will ever read. People tell that to a lot of kids as they go to school. So instead of just being who you are and being worried about it and being worried that everybody's going to go to hell, you also have the added benefit of being the only truth that they'll ever see. That's a lot of pressure to put on a little kid. And I bet a lot of people are talking to their therapists about that one as well. You love the sinner, but hate the sin. You can love the people out there, but you have to hate everything about them. That's okay. That's squares. That can even be people around you. It could even be people in meetings, really. You can love them. They do bad things, though, so you have to hate that. But when everything about them is defined as professing or not, it means you're hating them. Those are some of my favorite phrases because I think they're really impactful and have been impactful on my own life. There are a lot more phrases like this, and maybe you have some of your own. You can put them in the comments or something. The 2x2 project is just a constant cavalcade of stomping out your thoughts, stomping out your reactions to things, and making you nervous about even listening to your own self, about even listening to your own thoughts. Your thoughts are only evil continually. Man's wisdom leads to a maze, all this stuff. At the end of the day, everything you think is bad and everything you hear in meeting is good. This leads to a weird form of narcissism without any introspection. Everything is about you all the time. The world cares about you. You're the light of the world. But also, you never look at yourself. You never think about things. You're not introspective at all because you can't be. Your heart's evil. Your project is to reflect meetings at all times and never ever reflect yourself. It's to project meetings onto the world, project your ideology onto the world, and never think about yourself. You'll notice at no point I ever mentioned actual belief. I didn't talk about that at all because that's not part of this. This is just about controlling your thoughts as it pertains to meetings. Making sure that the emotions you have jive with the meetings and the thoughts you think lead you back to meetings and only to meetings, not to God. That's a separate thing. Your belief is a completely different thing. And I think part of the deconstruction process is understanding what God means to you when you have to consider God on your own. When you think, what does God really mean to me and how does God interact with my life? When you've been told your whole life that God looks a certain way and that if you believe in God at all, it leads you to meetings. That's one of the first things that people have to grapple with as they leave meetings, is that their conception of God has been completely manipulated. Their thoughts about God have been completely held hostage to certain ideas so that they look a certain way. And you don't have to do that anymore. You can think for yourself. And if you're a believing person, you can think about God in your own terms. In one way or another, you never, ever have to equivocate ever again. Now I've shown that 2x2 culture invades the precognitive part of your mind, your emotions, and now the cognitive part of your mind, your thoughts. How it takes even the thoughts in your head and the emotions you have and changes them into catchy little phrases that you can use instead of thinking. And anytime you start to think, anytime you start to doubt, anytime you start to learn, you can stomp it out and just go to meeting. And it teaches you that that is thinking, that that's what you're supposed to do, that you're supposed to equivocate, you're supposed to change words around to make them mean something else, and never listen to yourself. Tune yourself out completely. I really don't like that. And like I said before, the best thing about leaving meetings is that I don't have to do this ever again. I never have to ignore my thoughts. I never have to ignore my emotions. I never have to ignore myself. I'm allowed to listen to myself now. I'm allowed to think for myself. That doesn't mean I know everything, but it means I can learn. And learning is the next step. The next podcast I put out is going to be about what I learn. Now that I'm conscious that I have my own emotions and they're okay to have, they're how I was designed. And now that I've worked through thinking and how it's okay to think, now I want to learn. That'll be next time.